Hi, good afternoon. My name is Sandra, and I'm going to give you a little bit of a rundown on my final project. For this, I'm examining the use of propaganda during the Revolutionary War, specifically honing in on the use of images. My thesis for this project, as you'll see on the screen, is that during the years leading up to the Revolutionary War, American patriots cleverly used propaganda to establish their cause and grow in power. Their use of illustrations, cartoons, and catchy symbols were especially popular, presenting a persuasive, often one-sided argument that attracted supporters, inspired action, and heavily influenced future wartime propaganda efforts. In order to show this, you'll see the generic outline up there. I roughly follow this format. First, talking about the use of other forms of propaganda. It was actually much more common during this period, from what I've been reading, to use newspaper propaganda or circular letters or any kind of written thing, partially because of the invention of the printing press and its growth and popularity. But people also used other types, for example, the theater, in order to show visual propaganda to their audience. I'll discuss the purpose of the propaganda specific to this time a little bit, and then use a lot of primary sources to show the themes that they represented. I subdivided these into generic themes, the first being symbols, the second death motif, third recruitment, and fourth anti-British sentiment. And then I wrap it up by tying it to modern use of propaganda and its progression over the years. Just to go into a little bit more detail to kind of give you an example of what I use. The first symbol I'll discuss is called the Gadsden flag. It should be familiar to everybody out there. It's also just called the Don't Tread on Me flag. And this one's unique because it's been resurfacing in popularity in recent times, specifically among either military units or far right wing units or people. So this, I think, it's a good example to show how something that was once a symbol for patriotism and unity has kind of changed over the years and morphed a little bit. It's still often a positive symbol, but even that is starting to change. I found one source that talked about an incident that happened in Arizona where somebody actually filed a legal request to have the symbol moved from the office because they were offended by it, because the owner was a slave owner, and so it offended them in a racist tendency. So this is just a good example of how whatever symbol or whatever these symbols represent, it can change over time and is often out of your control to what it morphs into. The second image should be quite popular. It's Paul Revere's depiction of the Boston Massacre. This one's important because it shows how information can be slightly misconstrued in order to evoke a certain emotion. In this image, you'll notice a very aggressive British force that's firing on a very innocent, unarmed civilian force. It produces a lot of anger or a lot of emotion, which honestly was what I thought the Boston Massacre was until reading some of the sources that we read earlier in the semester. And in fact, it was much more ambiguous, and I actually felt myself feeling a lot of sympathy towards the troops that had to fire because they were slightly provoked into it. And then the last one, very common symbol, Benjamin Franklin's join or die rattlesnake. This one has actually resurfaced in popularity as well. And this one is a good representation of identity. He actually made this in the 1750s, a couple decades before the war, and then it resurfaced in popularity during the war quite a bit. And in this one, it just shows how they're trying to show that the colonies individually were not strong, but together they could form a strong animal. There's a lot of effort during this time to create an American identity because a lot of people still identified with their British culture. So they were trying to drive a wedge between the American-British identity. And then finally, I just kind of show how all of this is connected to modern times. Definitely you can see it in World War I and World War II military propaganda, but I believe, especially in modern times with the pervasiveness of media, we're seeing how effective propaganda can be, especially through visual means, such as with the news or images or videos and our accessibility to them nowadays. We're seeing this right now during our current times with very aggressive propaganda coming out of China, Russia, and then we've seen this over the last decade or so with various terrorist groups. Notably, ISIS was always very good at this. Personally, I work in the U.S. military, and we've actually been working with our psychological operations unit recently, and it's kind of opened my eyes to the importance of them in countering this propaganda and how we have to conduct our own within the honest means. So just kind of to wrap this up, my entire final project just seeks to show examples of how early Americans utilized images in their propaganda effectively to build an American identity, recruit soldiers and followers to their cause, and distance themselves from the nobility of Britain.